She ended up living on the street 3 months ago, addicted to fentanyl.
Well, I've been using.
So do we have adjustment thing?
Maybe speakers.
Yeah.
These new pills
There it
are
is.
fake oxys. He didn't tell me they were fentanyl because nobody knew what fentanyl was yet. He just said they're 100 times stronger and they're only $5 more. And I was just like, okay, because I was getting a pretty high tolerance at this point.
Oxys, OxyContin, led to fake 80s, fentanyl posing as OxyContin. Immediately, Katie wanted nothing else.
I could buy one of these fake 80s, put them into 4 lines, and 2 lines would last me a full day. That's how strong it was. And
Might have to use it if they can't hear it from up here.
What's that light coming through on the stream?
I don't know. I'll tell you, well.
Right now the sound's off on the stream, I think.
Yeah, no, I just turned it on a moment ago. Hey, Bev, would you call Ash down to Queen? We're going to try some sound stuff right quick. See which one sounds better.
Because I'm sure that I can probably speak where I won't need a microphone.
Well, we'll keep this mic right there. That'll be fine. That'll be good. That'll be pretty good. And that way it'll catch both of y'all.
I kind of like to move around. But
Oh, you do?
no,
Okay,
it's
well,
fine. No, it's fine.
Well,
I got a message from Cole. He said this sounds good.
sounds good. Like this, or which way though?
He's a deep one. He can hear it. Says he can hear it.
I wonder if he meant over the. I bet he.
if I did a full pill, I would OD.
Katie says she's overdosed 11 times.
Okay, call him back right quick and let's just try that again and see, make sure this will work. Because this will be better on the stream, I think. I'm not sure about that right there. And we can put this in front of that. I've got another wireless.
Okay. Yeah, if you have a mic, because Jessica may definitely need a mic.
Okay.
The sun was shining and I'm like, do I need to test it?
Turn it over and you can find.
They saw me running, they thought it was an emergency. We're all gonna die. Eventually. All right, Coach. There's Red. another woman in my life telling me I'm screwing up.
You can always count on me for that.
So when me and my wife split up, you do not have a chance at me, all right? I hate breaking her heart like that. That we done. All right, let's do that. Okay, that. Check. All right. Got her done.
Good deal. Thank you, sir.
And we're only 5 minutes in. Okay, to turn it on, just hold it in until it turns green.
Okay. Hold it in.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. I think everything else is good.
I appreciate all your help.
All right. Later. Just tell me when you're ready to go. I'm also going to record it just in case it needs editing or something like that.
Okay. Y'all, you let me know whenever y'all think we should start. I think at this point we're good.
Okay. So is everybody good? You good over there, Ryan? Yeah, I guess so. They should have. It's good on our part.
Hello, everybody. Glad to see all of y'all here. And I don't know if all of y'all know, but my name's Beverly Litchford. And this is Kyle Brewer. Kyle's going to be here to do the Narcan training with us today. So, thank y'all.
Thank you, Beverly. Everybody hear me okay? Yeah, how's everybody doing today? Good? Okay, well, I just want to say thank you to Beverly, to U of A Cossatot. Did I say that right? All right, it's the first time I've been here, and so the first time I've worked with the campuses, and I know it's taken a lot of work and effort to make this all happen. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, for not just for I to do a training, but for Jessica and I that is joining us later on. the Teacher of the Year, to also speak and share some of our story and our passion with the group today. So with that being said, we're going to get started with the first thing is a Narcan training. The first thing, and I'm sure you are familiar with this by now, is all this great paperwork that we have to do for grants. So this is all so we could give out the Narcan kits. So just make sure, if you have not already done so, that you have a course registration form filled out. You'll eventually have a pre and a post test completed. The course evaluation form that says how good of a job I did today. And then this piece of paper right here, I'll talk about it more later, but it is how you report if you were to save someone with this Narcan. And then there's some additional resources as well on the second page. So does everybody in the room have that information and receive the information? We good to go? Okay, well, we'll get started. I'm not going to share much about me because I have the opportunity later on to share my story. And so main thing is I wear a couple different hats. I work for UAMS part-time in the emergency department as a peer support specialist, where I help individuals that come in for an overdose or other drug and alcohol related issues. Also, my full-time job is with NADAC, the Association for Addiction Professionals, as the peer support and recovery services manager. And there's a lot of different things that go into that. But today I'm here to do Narcan training and share a personal story with you. And like I said, we'll get real into that at the next session. Before we get started though, just a quick question. What is your experience with overdose? Has anybody in the room ever had someone close to them overdose, ever seen someone overdose? Has anybody ever administered Narcan or naloxone? Yeah, would you mind sharing just what your experience is?
Personal experience, I had an adolescent who overdosed on bath salts and ended up having to pull out, found him in the shower, pulled him out. Unfortunately, he was already 22, and then just got into his mom's mental facility.
And he ended up being okay. That's good.
Still struggles though.
Understandable. Does anybody else in the room feel comfortable with sharing their experience? Well, Jessica, did you want to share?
Sure. I actually, my best friend of 20 plus years recently lost her stepson to overdose. The person he was with administered Narcan, but then did not take him to the hospital, and he ended up dying from overdose and accidental fentanyl.
So sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
So sorry. And that story is way too common, not just, in our state, but really around the country. And we'll talk a lot about that, and that is a good example of why this type of training and this type of information is so important. And so, again, thank you for being here. And thank you to those of you who shared your personal experience. Just a little bit of a roadmap. The purpose of today's class is to help understand opioid misuse and how to respond to an overdose. Some objectives that we have for today are to identify opioid overdose signs, know the steps to administer Narcan or naloxone. So Narcan is the brand name, that's the nasal spray that you'll receive. Naloxone is like the more medical term, I guess you would say. Participants will know where to get additional information. So you're going to leave here with resources as well, whether that be to get more Narcan, or that be to get resources for treatment and prevention and recovery for you or a loved one or a friend or a family member. So that's kind of our roadmap for today. So let's talk about the Arkansas drug overdose mortality rate. And so the way that they do this in the United States, the National Center for Health Statistics, is per 100,000 people. And so Arkansas had the 44th highest drug mortality rate in the United States in 2020. This data takes quite a while to get completely up to date. So this is the information that we have right now that I'm able to share. So that put us at having 19.1 people per 100,000 people that suffered from a drug overdose fatality, meaning that they had an overdose and unfortunately did not survive that overdose. In 2020, that 19.1 per 100,000 people may not sound like a lot of people when you put it in that regard, but that number actually is 546 individuals. So 546 moms, dads, sons, daughters, family members, every level of society impacted in that number, and that represents 546 families that their lives have been forever changed. And unfortunately, we're seeing those numbers continue to rise due to a variety of factors, one being fentanyl that we'll talk about later on. This is just a map of the opioid mortality rate. I'm going to give you information of where you can go find, if you're a data person, you like statistics and seeing all that stuff, there's a dashboard on artakeback.org that you'll be able to go in and you'll be able to look at all these different maps and these numbers and all the information and see all the most up-to-date recent numbers. But you can see, as in the darker blue is a higher mortality rate. Down here, closer to where we're located, it's real low. I mean, 0 right here. And some people ask, well, wow, what's the deal there? And then there's 11.6 here in Miller. Sometimes, especially in little towns, there's maybe reporting problems with the coroner's office. There can be everybody from this town is actually getting taken to this town for those types of reasons. There's a variety of things that can lead to, like, the statistics looking that way. Then obviously you see in Central Arkansas it's pretty saturated. And we're trying to do a lot better of getting education and training out there to get coroners and everybody up to date on reporting this information, because it's not easy to get the stigma and the shame that's associated with overdose and drug and alcohol or mental health challenges is a real big issue, and it's a barrier. But it can keep us from having accurate data and information as well. One of the things, this is not the whole piece of the equation. I'm not someone that's going to say that the whole reason the opioid epidemic is happening has happened and is continuing to go on is because of prescriptions. I think there's a variety of things that happened over the past several years that has led us to this place, and it's going to take a collaborative effort moving forward to make progress. But one of the things is the dispensing rates for opioids. Arkansas has ranked number 2 in the U.S. for the past several years. We've been holding strong at number 2, which is not a good place to be in this category for the number of opioid prescriptions written per 100 people. In 2020, there were 75.8 opioid prescriptions per 100 people. So, meaning out of 100 people, 75 of them statistically have been written an opioid prescription in 2020. And so we've came a long ways. Those numbers have declined over the past few years, but we still, personally in Arkansas, have a lot of work to do on getting that dispensing rate down, on offering some alternative medications or pain treatments. This is another map breakdown of opioid prescriptions by county. You can see, down here that Little River and Sevier and let's see, Howard right here. I can't really make that out, but it's a little bit darker blue, so it's a little higher, and that's all based off of the per 100 people by county. And again, I mentioned earlier, if you really want to dive into that information and take a look at it and learn more, if you're working on something for school, if this is something that you need this information for, or you just want to share it with others, artakeback.org is a great resource. And you'll go on there and you can go to the Arkansas Opioid Dashboard. And that dashboard is filled with a plethora of resources, along with a lot of the statistics and the data that I just shared with you. So, now that we've moved past the data and the statistics and highlighted the problem, I think at this point we're all aware that this is an issue that not only affects us and our country, but it affects every single one of our communities. And so, again, I just want to reiterate my gratitude for you being here, because, this is part of what it takes to move forward, is to get education out there, to get resources out there, and to start talking about these things and having these conversations. So we're going to talk a little bit about what are opioids. I'm assuming, which I know you're not supposed to assume things, but just based off of from what I do know about this audience, that Some of you, or a lot of you, know or have heard of opioids before, particularly prescription opioids. Familiar with opioids? Yeah, people in the room? All right. So these are going to be drugs like heroin, opium. That's more of the street type of drug that you might hear of when it comes to opioids. But the ones that certainly I was more familiar with, and that we can be more familiar with in the medical community, is the prescription pain medications such as morphine, codeine, methadone, oxycodone, which has a variety of different names, one of them being roxicodone, hydrocodone, fentanyl, hydromorphone, which is also called Dilaudid, and then buprenorphine, which is also Subutex or Suboxone, is also considered an opioid. These drugs are narcotic sedatives that depress the central nervous system, reduce pain, and may cause drowsiness. High doses can cause unconsciousness. We see time and time again, and I'm sure most people in this room, I know myself, multiple occasions, that, whatever procedure it was, you'll hear later in my story, for me it was my wisdom teeth. After something like that, you get a prescription for hydrocodone or oxycodone or something to treat the pain. We've made a lot of strides in a positive direction in that regard, as far as doing better than that. But that's still kind of in a lot of ways standard protocol for pain. Some synthetic opioids. All opioids can be dangerous and deadly, but synthetic opioids are particularly dangerous and deadly. These are drugs like fentanyl and carfentanil. There's been a lot of news coverage and media coverage surrounding fentanyl, so I'm assuming that people in the room, have you heard of fentanyl or carfentanil? Anybody have any experience with it? I'm not saying that you've used it, but you know someone, or you came across it in your community or in your line of work. Does anybody have any experience with fentanyl at this point in time? That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing whatsoever. But it is certainly here. It's in the state. It's in every one of our communities, and it is killing people at a rapid rate. And the reason it's doing that is because it's highly potent and endangers you through inhaling or accidental ingestion or intentional usage, which oftentimes is an accidental overdose. Most people don't plan to overdose. They don't want to die. You'll hear later in my story that really we just want to feel normal and feel not sick. And so that's the whole purpose behind once you're in that cycle. And so, but you've taken, certain medication, and you've taken it 100 times before, but this time it's been laced with fentanyl, and you're not aware of it. And it could take one pill to kill you, take your life. And so it's really important not to search people's living areas or vehicles, or, if you suspect you have a loved one that's using or something, because you could accidentally be exposed to the drug. And this type of drug, particularly fentanyl and carfentanil, if you inhale it or you were to touch it, those types of things can even be enough to cause you to have an overdose yourself. And so we want to avoid doing those things. Just to give you an idea, that's a penny. We all kind of know how big a penny is. That's 2 milligrams of powder next to a penny. This amount of fentanyl is all it takes to cause dizziness, nausea, and other signs of overdose in anyone coming in contact with the drug. And that is not a whole lot of medication or a substance to cause you to overdose or start experiencing the signs of an overdose. So I'm just trying to paint the picture that this is a very powerful synthetic opioid analgesic that is similar to morphine, but is 50 to 100 times more potent. So the morphine that we use in the hospitals and that people get prescribed, it's 50 to 100 times more potent than that. Carfentanil, which is another, I don't know the right term, but form of fentanyl, or kind of like with COVID, the variants that come out, there's different variants of fentanyl, and now there's stuff called xylazine, and just a variety of different drugs that are contributing to killing so many different people in our communities. But carfentanil has a potency of approximately 10,000 times that of morphine, which is 100 times more powerful than fentanyl. So that should, give you a little bit of an idea of how dangerous and how deadly it is. And I just want to highlight this, that you don't have to be using opioids for you to overdose on fentanyl. They're finding fentanyl in just about any drug you can think of, especially any type of prescription pill. They're pressing pills with pill press and cutting it with fentanyl, putting it into cocaine, putting it into heroin, putting it even into marijuana. So really, at any level of drug use, you could potentially come into contact and be exposed to fentanyl. And so another reason why it's so important that even if you or nobody you know uses opioids, or you think that's not a part of your kind of day-to-day, it may be, and it's good to have this medication, Narcan, because you could be the one that could potentially save their lives. We're going to watch a couple videos. We'll start out with the first one here. You have to tell me how the sound is.
This is Susan. Susan loves to bike. While out for a ride, she falls and breaks her arm. Special cells called neurons send a signal through the spinal cord to the brain, which interprets the signal as pain. Susan understands the pain means she needs to go to the hospital, and her body is equipped for survival, helping her not to panic so she can seek help. Many of her neurons are covered in proteins called opioid receptors. These receptors act like a brake to slow down the neuron's ability to send pain signals. When injured, her body releases natural painkillers called endorphins. Like a key in a lock, endorphins activate opioid receptors, slowing down the pain signal and preventing a panic. Susan gets treated for the broken bone, but 3 months later, her arm still hurts. And now that pain is making her feel depressed and anxious. So her doctor prescribes an opioid painkiller. There are many different opioids, but they all share a chemical similarity to our own endorphins. This allows them to bind to the same opioid receptors and stop pain signals. But that's not all they do. Deep inside Susan's brain is a region called the ventral tegmental area, or VTA for short. The VTA is full of neurons that produce a chemical called dopamine. When something good happens, dopamine is released, giving Susan a feeling of pleasure. This helps teach her brain to keep seeking out good things. To keep dopamine neurons in check, inhibitory neurons keep the brakes on until something good comes along. Just like the pain neuron, these neurons are covered in opioid receptors. When Susan takes the painkiller prescribed by her doctor, the opioid receptors turn off the inhibitory neurons and release the brake on the dopamine neurons. The rush of dopamine temporarily eliminates Susan's depression and anxiety, and she feels relief, calmness, and even euphoria. As Susan continues to take the painkillers, her brain responds by trying to regain its balance. Her inhibitory neurons work extra hard, even when the opioid receptors are activated, and it becomes harder and harder for her dopamine neurons to release dopamine. Susan finds that she needs to increase her dose of painkillers in order to feel comfortable. This is called tolerance. Eventually, Susan's pills run out. Inhibitory neurons that have been working overtime are let loose, clamping down on those dopamine neurons and shutting them off almost immediately. Now, not only is Susan in pain, but the depression and anxiety come back. On top of that, Susan feels ravaged by an inescapable physical sickness far worse than any flu. Susan's body is going through withdrawal. Most people who take opioids for a long time tend to experience some withdrawal, but they can still stop taking the pills and return to normal. But for people like Susan, it's not so easy. Her genetics and the environment she grew up in put her at a higher risk for addiction. Her withdrawal symptoms aren't just unpleasant, they're unbearable. Susan thinks the only way to feel normal is to find more opioids. And this is how the cycle of opioid addiction emerges, driven by a brain trying to regain its balance. But there is hope for Susan. Though the road to recovery can be challenging and there may be setbacks, treatments can retrain Susan's brain. With the help of medication, and therapy, Susan finds pleasure in her life once again.
So one of the main things from that video is that when we're talking about addiction, whether that be to opioids or any other drug or alcohol or anything for that matter, we're talking about a disease, and we're talking about a medical issue and a brain condition. And you know, I really want to encourage us today that if we don't view and we don't have a lens that that's the way we view these issues, that we begin to view them in that manner. Similar to the way that we view other medical conditions like cancer or diabetes, where you know there's not a huge amount of stigma attached to it. We don't blame people for their condition and their issues. This can happen to every single one of us. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and like I said, I usually share some of my story throughout this presentation, but because I'm going to share my full story next, I'm not going to get into it. But 6 years ago, I was homeless, and my life was completely different than it was today, and it was really bad. And so it can happen to anybody. I'm sure everybody in this room, you've either been in you know, a place where someone's asked the question, you know, how many people know someone that's overdosed or been affected by opioids? And, you know, if we were all to be honest with ourselves, like directly or indirectly, meaning through a family member or a friend or someone you know, we've all been touched by it. Our communities have in a variety of different ways. And so that video helps paint the picture of how people become addicted. Dependence on prescription medication for existing pain, continuing medication after symptoms are gone, kind of like they were showing that Susan was doing, a major event happening in their life. You'll hear that's what one big thing that led to mine. Either that could be trauma or loss or, you know, a pandemic or a variety of different things. And then there's the deliberately misusing a prescription opioid or an illicit drug like heroin. All of these are examples and ways that people can become addicted. It's certainly not an exhaustive list. I really like that graphic at the bottom because it says at the root of all addiction is pain. And so you'll hear in my story that there's roots there, you know, where it all started. Now that I've gone through a process, I've been able to look back and identify that. But for a long time, I had no idea why I was doing what I was doing. We're going to watch this video. This girl.
This is the new young face of fentanyl addiction. Before and after. 22-year-old Katie Mather, forehead and chin clawed open by her own fingernails because the use of fentanyl makes her skin crawl. I spot her on the Strip, Surrey's infamous drug hangout, and ask if she'll talk to me. She puts cover-up on her raw skin.
So I'm literally just did my mascara and I'm good to go.
Katie settles in to tell her story.
There you go. Perfect.
How she ended up living on the street 3 months ago, addicted to fentanyl.
Well, I've been using, it's actually funny, well, not funny, it's terrible. I have a really addictive personality. I've always been, like, addicted to something, whether it was shopping or Facebook or whatever. And I did an oxy. I got addicted right away. And then I finally found a regular dealer and I started picking up all the time. I remember the day the fentanyl came out and my dealer said, you know, I've got these new pills. They're fake oxys. He didn't tell me they were fentanyl because nobody knew what fentanyl was yet. He just said they're 100 times stronger and they're only $5 more. And I was just like, okay, because I was getting a pretty high tolerance at this point.
Oxys, OxyContin, led to fake 80s, fentanyl posing as OxyContin. Immediately, Katie wanted nothing else.
I could buy one of these fake 80s, put them into 4 lines, and 2 lines would last me a full day. That's how strong it was. And if I did a full pill, I would OD.
Katie says she's overdosed 11 times, most recently a few days ago. Brought back by paramedics or friends on the Strip who have naloxone, the powerful opioid antidote.
Every time I do dope, I know I'm taking a risk. I know that I might die, but like, it doesn't matter how many times I've OD'd, I still use the next day because the withdrawals are so bad.
Katie has been in the news before. She and her sister attacked by a Rottweiler cross back in December. Katie was badly hurt and spent time in hospital. She says that cemented her addiction to fentanyl. As she talks, blood starts to seep through her makeup.
Katie, you're 22. Why would you risk this?
Well, at first it was just fun, right? It was just for fun. It was just a party drug that, like, and there's been some things that I've gone through and it helped with a lot of pain. And especially after, that dog attack, I just couldn't stop,
I ask Katie if she worries about herself and her future.
Sometimes. I mean, I don't know. I just like to take things one day at a time, right? I'll kind of just go with it and hopefully, hope for the best.
For now, the best Katie can hope for is to wake up from her next fix of fentanyl. Eric Rankin, CBC News, Surrey.
And that's Katie's story, and unfortunately that story is a very common story that we hear, and you'll hear later on all the time. And you may know someone that may be going through this challenge right this very moment. And she said something in there. It started out, which is fun. It felt good. It took away pain. It helped to deal with some things that I've gone through in life. And somewhere along the way, it changed. And it was not about being fun anymore. And it was all about keeping the withdrawal symptoms away. And that's really what it becomes all about, is living in that cycle of using and doing everything you can not to get sick. And so we're going to transition to talking about some risk factors for overdose. These are some things that individuals could do, or you could, some decisions people could make that could increase their likelihood of overdosing. Mixing drugs, so using a prescription opioid or other prescription medications with alcohol, or mixing prescription medications, particularly opioids and benzodiazepines. That's definitely a big one that I want to highlight, because it's a common combination that people are prescribed to often. Is they'll have an opioid prescription and a benzodiazepine prescription, which is something like a Xanax or clozapam, those types of medications for anxiety. If a break is taken from use, so say an individual goes to treatment or they go to detox, their tolerance then lowers from what it was when they went in, and then they come back out and they return to using the same dose that they did before. That can increase their likelihood of overdosing. Being alone doesn't necessarily increase the risk of an overdose, but it certainly increases the risk that no one is around to help if something goes wrong. And so, even in today, like we talk about approaches called like harm reduction. And so, we meeting people where they're at. If an individual is using drugs and this is the path that they are on, and this is where they want to stay at for this moment in time, like meeting them there and what are some things that we can do to support them to make sure they don't die. And then, hopefully one day, it'll lead them to recovery and to making a different decision. But some of those things are like making sure that they have naloxone and they don't use alone. A new dealer comes into town, or a new supply of drugs may have a different strength than previously used. Again, not being aware that something you might have used several times before, now you use the exact same amount, exact same thing, but because there's something cut into it, you could overdose. For intravenous users, in other words, individuals that will inject drugs with like a needle, someone else preparing the injection means that person controls the dose. So someone that is injecting drugs into their body always needs to be the person that is controlling the amount and the dose of whatever they're putting into their body outside of a hospital setting. Obviously, I'm talking about basically recreational use at this point. Some additional risk factors. It can be accidental or intentional. I've lost, I can't tell you how many friends, and a family member. I've lost a lot of people to this disease, and particularly to opioid use and fentanyl use. And the circumstances surrounding those situations usually tell me that it was accidental. It doesn't mean that people don't intentionally overdose, because that can be the case sometimes, but a lot of times It's not the plan. They wake up that day and say, I want to die today. They probably woke up that day and said, I don't want to be sick today, and so I'm going to do what I need to do to stay well. And then one of those things that we were talking about earlier could happen. They get something that's cut with something, or they take too much, or they use a loan, or any of those things happen. But it can be accidental or intentional. It can be the result of mixing medications, as I said earlier, over-medicating, when a patient or individual misunderstands the directions for use. So this is important too. We need to empower, if you go into the medical field, and you're in the medical community, like, and I'm by no means an expert or anything like that. I'm just saying that empowering the people that we're providing treatment to make sure they have all the information, they understand what they're taking, they understand the different options that are available, that, even if they're not asking the right questions, because a lot of times, particularly in a medical setting, there's this power dynamic where it's the doctor or the nurse or the nurse practitioner or whoever that they're like in control, and they've got all the knowledge and education. They're distributing all the information, and you're just listening, and you're just taking it all in, and you just go on and go about your day and pick up your medication. And again, at the pharmacy, how many times, those consultations, it's real quick, brief, so if we spent a little bit more time being intentional about our education with each other, I think that may also help to decrease some of these risk factors. Also like this graphic where it says addiction is a family disease. One person may use, but the whole family suffers. I don't know if that resonates with anybody in this room, but I know if my mom was in the room, it definitely resonated with her. And I'll tell you more about my mother later on. But it affects the entire family. And I would even go beyond that to say it affects the entire community. So identifying opioid overdose. The inability to awaken verbally or upon chest rubbing. We'll see a video a little bit later on about a sternum rub. Shallow, slow breathing of less than 3 to 5 breaths per minute, or no breathing at all. Exhaled breath with a raspy, labored sound or snoring sound. Their fingernails or lips are turning blue or purple. They have slow and slurred speech. These are all signs that you could be looking for as this being a potential opioid overdose if you were to ever come across someone that is demonstrating these symptoms. This is another great graphic. It says, loving your child in the face of their addiction doesn't mean excusing their behavior. It's about seeing them as sick instead of seeing them as bad. Again, it's a change from this is not a moral issue or a moral failing. This is a medical condition that an individual is dealing with, and we must treat it as such. Here's another video.
We've had many years of scientific research looking at what happens with the brain that is exposed chronically to various substances. We know very well now about changes in the brain that make it very difficult for someone who is addicted to just put the drugs away.
Family members, society, we all think, why can't these people, these patients, these addicts just stop? And it's not like that. They're not the same person once they become dependent on drugs. They're a different person. They can't get to those same skills that they once could get to because their brain is now rewired. It's only thinking about the drug.
The changes occur in many parts of the brain that govern memory, decision-making, impulsivity, and learning.
Opioids are so reinforcing that you can't just, quit. People's brains aren't in the right place to actually hear how to cope and how to avoid triggers and how to do the things to get themselves to a place where they can be opiate-free. It's really with working with families to acknowledge that their spouse, their son, their sibling is not exactly the same person that they're trying to remember that they were, that we have to work through it slowly, gradually to get them back to that place. It's a different brain. We have to kind of unwire what just got all tangled up with the drugs.
Their ability to inhibit the behavior is much decreased. They have much stronger urges and cravings. They're much more sensitive to effects of stress. So basically, the brain is very different, and that's why we often refer to these changes as a medical or brain disorder.
got another video.
Feel like come down yet?
Yeah.
Stop right there. Think you need to see medical or something?
They ain't gonna do nothing for me anyway.
No? All right, go ahead and step in here for real quick.
I had a great life. I had a great job, great family. I was engaged when I wasn't using. And then these past 2.5, 3 years just been the worst. I've lost everything. Everything in life. These marks here are all old. You see all these little marks right here on my hand? I mean, you can't see any veins in my arms or hands. See, these marks, all these right here, these are all old. All these ones are all new. All the way up here, on this leg, down this leg here, all my whole legs, everything. Those are the new ones. It's pretty bad addiction. I don't even get high anymore. I just do it so I can feel normal. I'm starting to get withdrawals, and it's starting to take effect now since I haven't used in almost 12 hours. You start getting cold, cold, hot, cold, hot. You start sneezing a lot, nose starts running, vomiting. You can't get comfortable. Imagine being physically sick with the flu, just where you don't want to move. Your bones ache, your body aches, your stomach hurts. You just feel like throwing up. You just drained of everything physically. And that's what I'm going to start going through. I'm scared, and let's be honest.
So for someone that's in the middle of opioid dependence and addicted to opioids or other drugs, that's their reality, particularly opioids, is that those withdrawal symptoms, he said it, I just want to feel normal. I don't want to be sick. That's the whole, goal and mission, is to keep those withdrawal symptoms from coming and feeling that way, because it's, one of the worst feelings in the world. You're gonna feel it. You'll feel like you're gonna die, but you won't die with opioids. Other drugs detoxing off of you will, but opioid is one of those ones that it'll make you feel like you're gonna die. And you do any and everything you can to prevent that from happening. So just keeping that in mind too, as if you go about your day and meet people and get to know people and learn their stories or hear what they're going through. That's their reality. That's their day to day that they wake up and live with. And if they had a choice, they could stop it and make it all go away right then. I'm sure. I know for me, I would have taken that door and that option a long time ago, but it's just not that easy. Talk about the Joshua Ashley Polly Act, where there's some cards over there where it says "Don't run, call 911." That's referring to this law. Joshua Ashley Polly was a student at UCA. I actually was just with his mother last Friday up in Jonesboro. We sat on a panel together discussing the opioid epidemic and the issues surrounding that. And so his friends, they were out partying one night there at UCA, and he had taken some prescription drugs and he overdosed. And his friends were scared and afraid of getting in trouble. They didn't want to get arrested, and they didn't want anybody to find out, so they abandoned him, and he later on passed away from that overdose. And so his mother and his family took that pain and that tragedy and turned it into something very purposeful and very positive, and to advocacy and advocate for this law to happen, which is the Joshua Ashley Polly Act, was signed into law in 2015, so that someone seeking medical assistance from an overdose for themselves or another person cannot be charged or prosecuted for simple possession. So, for instance, an individual can't, if they have some pills on them, or if they have some other drugs on them, they won't be charged in good faith trying to help another person get medical attention for an overdose. This is what the law states clearly: is that the person shall not be arrested, charged, or prosecuted for possession of a controlled substance if the evidence results solely from seeking medical assistance. If the person in good faith seeks medical assistance for another person who is experiencing a drug overdose, a person who is experiencing a drug overdose and in good faith seeks medical assistance for himself or herself, officers may still be able to arrest for other charges such as outstanding warrants or other crimes. So, keep in mind, if you have other things going on, you could potentially have that may get you in trouble. But possession charges, this law really speaks to, no matter what the situation is, you getting in trouble for having drugs or alcohol on you or your friends should not be a reason not to take someone to the hospital, to not call 911, to not seek medical attention. There is a law in place in our state to protect you from that. Overdose death is preventable, and it's important that we know what to do. And that is one of the main reasons, or the main reason for this particular presentation, is to talk about Narcan. How many of you have heard of or used Narcan before? Heard of? Anybody used it before? Yeah? Do you care to share? You don't have to. I don't put you on.
It was at work. I had a patient that was oversedated.
Yeah.
And just, she failed to tell us that she took oral pain medications at home. And on top of what we gave her IV, it was just too much.
Yeah.
We had to.
Did y'all use it intravenous Narcan? Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And so most people at this point, which is, the fact that most people in the room has heard of it, it's so much more progress than we were 3, 4, 5 years ago, where this was not something people heard of or talked about, or it was addressed and talked about openly. So I'm encouraged to see that many have at least heard of Narcan. And so what is this drug? What is Narcan? It is a drug that is used to reverse the effects of opioids. And just be very clear that that's specifically what this drug is designed to do, to reverse the effects of opioids. Back to the previous slides, the prescription pain medications, heroin, fentanyl, carfentanil, those types of drugs is what this medication is designed to reverse the effects of. It is completely safe and effective with no risk of abuse. This is not going to harm anybody or hurt anybody. It can't get anybody high. It won't cause anybody harm. If there's someone you think is overdosed from opioids and you were to give it to them, if it's not an opioid overdose, it's not going to do anything to them. It's not going to reverse the overdose, first off, but it's not going to harm them, most importantly. So a lot of times it's a good, I don't want to say good, but it's one way of ruling something out. If you think that someone may be overdosed, to give them naloxone or Narcan. It is intended for rescue use, not long-term treatment. That is really important. This we'll talk more about how long this lasts, but this is just to revive someone until 911 can get there, or you can get them to the hospital for further medical care. Here's a graphic that talks about how naloxone reverses an overdose. Like the video we watched earlier, those opioid receptors on our brain, the naloxone has a higher affinity, is what it's called, to those receptors than opioids do. And so it binds to those receptors and kicks the opioid off for a period of time. Again, that is only for 30 to 90 minutes, depending on how many doses, how much opioids is in the individual system. So it is really, really important that individuals go to the hospital. So this is just a short-term solution to bring someone back to life until you can get them to the hospital or an ambulance can get to them. Once the Narcan wears off, those opioids that are still in the body can attach back to those receptors and they can go into an overdose again. So it's very important for them to get to the hospital because they could go into another overdose without ever taking any other more opioids, and so not knowing and assuming that they were okay. What are the side effects of Narcan? So if you ever brought their experience in the hospital, I'm just going to guess that the person was probably not the most pleasant individual when they woke up, but that's typically the response. And so don't be surprised or alarmed, and be prepared for this, that the side effects of Narcan are look a lot like that list of withdrawal symptoms, because that's essentially what it is it takes the opioids off of the brain and off of those receptors. And so basically that person goes into what's called a precipitated withdrawal and starts the withdrawal effect, and they'll start feeling all these symptoms that you see listed here. They may become combative, so just being mindful of that and being aware of that, and knowing that that's a normal response, because essentially the thing that, day to day that you go trying to prevent from happening, getting sick, now they're instantly in that mode. And instead of, realizing, oh, you just saved my life, it's not about that. It's about how you physically feel at that point in time, and that's what they're responding based off of. And so it's not a personal thing or again a moral thing. It's a medical thing. What to do if you expect or suspect an overdose? Number one is check for the signs of an opioid overdose, like we went through earlier. Can anybody name off a sign or two that we talked about? Slow breathing. Good job. Fingernails turning blue. Snoring sound. Snoring the breathing. Yeah, good job, y'all. Number two, alert EMS or emergency medical services. In other words, call 911. I want to highlight this, that this step is before the administer naloxone step, and that's on purpose, because the ambulance needs to be on the way while you're administering naloxone. So once you identify and go into that mode and you think they have an opioid overdose, call 911 immediately, and then start going through the list of administering naloxone, supporting the person's breathing, and monitoring their response. Stimulating and alerting emergency medical services. If you suspect an overdose, call 911. Listen to the breathing. You don't want to leave the person alone. And you can try to get them to respond, verbally or physically by rubbing your knuckles up and down the breastbone. It's called a sternum rub. And this video right here, for the sake of time, I think we're going to have to skip it. But basically, it's an officer that does this type of maneuver, I guess you would call it, on someone to try to get them to respond. And you can see that when he's rubbing it, if you're overdose or you're asleep or something, if you can respond to that, you typically are going to. So if someone does it, then that's also a really good sign that they're not just overdose, but have a significant amount of opioids in their system. So administering naloxone. So today, what you'll receive after completing this course, this training, is you'll receive a kit that looks like this. And inside this kit, there is, and this is all due to the Criminal Justice Institute, the University of Arkansas system of CJA, that they provided these Narcan kits with funding. So it's a big thank you to them. But you'll receive a kit that has 2 doses of the nasal spray Narcan, in the name brand Narcan, and each one of them will come in a wrapper like this and look just like this. To administer it, you'll essentially just open. Says peel back here. You'll open it up, and it'll look, as you see on the screen. There's basically like a Flonase or any type of nasal spray. There's a plunger at the bottom. It's red or a pinkish color. You'll press that plunger all the way down, and that will administer the Narcan or naloxone. After you do that, and you may have to do multiple doses. I've heard of people having, upwards of 10, 15 doses administered to them during one overdose. It just depends on how much opioids are in their system, but especially with fentanyl and carfentanil being so powerful, it takes a lot more naloxone or Narcan to reverse the effects. So after you do that, you want to place the person on their back, tilt their chin up to open their airway. Not after, just necessarily kind of simultaneously. Check to see if there's anything in their mouth. Pinch their nose with one hand and give 2 even regular sized breaths, and then give 1 every 5 seconds. In this kit, you'll find a face shield and protective, some personal protection equipment that you can use to deliver that rescue breathing to the individuals and to support their breathing throughout this process. It's very important to place them in the recovery position. This is what the recovery position looks like. They have their hand supporting their head. Their knee stops their body, stops them from rolling onto their stomach. And you do not want them on their back because, can anybody guess why? Yeah, exactly. And another way of saying that is someone, if they vomit, as that's one of the side effects of Narcan, they can potentially choke on it or aspirate on it. And so having them in this rescue position is very important. Continue to monitor their response. It takes 1 to 3 minutes for Narcan to start working, and Narcan will last 30 to 90 minutes, but opioids stay in the system longer. So again, it's important that the individual must go to the hospital. Narcan can result in projectile vomiting, so the recovery position avoids choking, and some individuals may become combative, as we talked about earlier, when they regain consciousness. You can continue to repeat these steps as much as necessary. The only recommendation is to, when you're using the nasal spray, just switch nostrils each time that you do it. But there's not a limit or an amount of the medication that you can or cannot give someone. It's whatever it takes, and that's going to be based off of how much opioids in someone's system, which is something you can't tell at that moment. So until you can get them to respond and EMS can get there. It all depends on the type of drug and how much has been in their system. Repeat steps 3 and 4 by giving a second dose, as I said, in the opposite nostril.
How much does those things hold?
How much? It's 4 milligrams. Each one of the nasal sprays are 4 milligrams of naloxone. They make a 8 milligram too of it's a different kind of name, but there's an 8 milligram type of naloxone spray out there as well. And there are other, on that topic, there are injection types of naloxone. There are other ways of delivering naloxone. This training, obviously, we're talking specifically about the nasal spray, this type of Narcan. Talk to emergency medical services when they get there. Make sure that you tell them that you've given the person Narcan. Communicate as much information as you can. Again, remember earlier, there's laws in place that you cannot get in trouble or get arrested because you're trying to help someone. So be, just honest and upfront about whatever's going on or whatever you might have found out in the process of helping this individual. Here are some things to avoid doing. Do not slap or try to forcefully stimulate the person. It will hurt them. It will hurt them further if they're unconscious. It would also hurt me if I was conscious too, so just don't slap people. Put the person into a cold bath or shower because this increases the risk of falling, drowning, or going into shock. So I know sometimes that's a response to an overdose, is to put someone in the shower. I really advise against doing that for those reasons. Do not inject the person with any substance. Salt water, milk, speed. So sometimes if someone's overdosed on heroin or opioid, someone might think that injecting them with a drug that does the opposite effect may work. That's not the case. It won't help. It's a waste of time, and Narcan is much more effective. Do not try to make the person vomit drugs that he or she may have swallowed. They may choke or inhale their vomit. So these are just some things to avoid doing. Post-Narcan treatment. Stay with the person in case an additional dose is needed. Stay with the person really until they are in the hands of a medical professional or at the hospital. Continue rescue breathing as needed. When the person is alert, if you can, explain to them what happened and that Narcan was given, because they're not going to understand what just happened. They're not gonna come back and realize, okay, I just overdosed, someone just saved me. Who's this person standing over me? What's going on? They're going to be in a really confused state of mind. And so explaining them explaining to them what happened can help to decrease their confusion and combativeness. Discourage the person from taking more drugs to reduce the withdrawal symptoms, because immediately, since they're sick, that's going to be the first thought, is to use again, because it's all about not being sick. And so That's where, I'll talk about more later, we're at the hospital where they get introduced to medical care, they get introduced to peer support specialists like myself and recovery resources and treatment. This can oftentimes be a pivotal point in someone's life, that has them, decide, okay, maybe I'll try something new or I'll try something different. So it's a very sensitive, couple hours post Narcan administration and saving someone. Storing Narcan. So safe Narcan storage is very important. We want to keep it in a place that is easy to access, do not expose to extreme temperatures. It says to keep it at room temperature, and I know we live here in Arkansas, so we get really hot in the summer and cold in the winter. So the easiest place where I would love to keep this is in my car, but during those seasons, probably not the best time to keep it in the car because it's going to affect the I don't know if the viability, if that's the right word, or basically just like the effectiveness of it. It's going to affect the medication. So I keep several doses in my backpack over there because I always take my backpack with me. So your purse or your backpack or something like that. Keep them stored. You saw that I didn't take this out of the blister package because you're not supposed to take it out until you're going to use it. And I don't want to waste it on just taking it out of the package. So keep it in here, keep it in this package until you're ready to use it. And the instructions are very simple. It's not a complicated process. It says peel here and you peel it off and then you take the dose out. Watch the expiration date of the package. Technically, there's an expiration date, but I'll just say this, like for the sake of this training, I have to tell you, like when it says it expires, it's the expiration date. But outside of this training, I've learned other information that the expiration date that maybe, it can last longer. So just if you need more, just pay attention to the expiration date. And but if it's expired, don't say, oh, well, I can't use this if someone's sitting there overdose and still use it. Reporting Narcan use. So you have one of those documents that were given to you that has this QR code that will take you to the page where you can report a Narcan save or the use of Narcan that you've received from this training. And so you just scan that code, it'll take you there, you'll fill out some information, it can be completely anonymous. And in the box, you can just check first responder, what agency or right family or friend. It doesn't ask you for your personal information and your anonymity and confidentiality is protected in that process. But again, data, statistics, and numbers are important to keep up with, and so it really helps the state with that process. As I mentioned earlier, today you leave with this kit that has 2 doses of Narcan, your personal protective equipment like gloves and a CPR shield. And if additional Narcan is needed, you can also obtain it through a local pharmacy. Excuse me. In Arkansas, we have a statewide standing order which does not require a prescription, meaning that you should be able to, and I highlight the word should, you should be able to go into any pharmacy and walk up to any pharmacist and ask for naloxone, and they should be able to give it to you. Now, the factors that come into play is, does your insurance cover it? How much is it going to cost? Are you going to deal with stigma? Does the pharmacist know that this law even exists? There's a lot of things that happen in that process, but we have a law, standing order, that you should be able to walk into any pharmacy and get naloxone on your request from your pharmacist. Great resource here is Narcansol. It's an app that was really specific to Arkansas. We're the only state that can have that name. But it provides a lot of different resources, like where to find treatment and support. You can download it at Google Play or iTunes. It also has a website. It's www.narcansol.com. In your kit, there's a couple little magnets, Narcansol magnets as well, that will show you where you can download that information. In addition to this, there's some other information that you can access through these websites is how to talk to your doctor handbook. So the objectives of this are to increase the confidence in filling out medical forms, increase confidence in communicating with healthcare providers, and just making that a more honest, trusting relationship, and increase confidence in taking medicines as prescribed. Arkansas Drug Take Back. So this website I talked about earlier is really the cornerstone of it is Arkansas Drug Take Back Day, which happens to be this Saturday. There will be events all over the state, a variety of different locations. You can go to this website to find out a location near you. I don't know if anybody knows off the top of their hand what's closest around here, but there'll be all kinds of places set up where there'll be police officers, law enforcement agencies that you can return unused, unwanted, unneeded prescription medications or non-prescription medications, and they will be disposed of properly and safely, no questions asked. They do this event twice a year. As of October, or in October 2020, just that Drug Take Back Day, they received 38,960 pounds of medication that were taken off the street or out of the cabinets. And so, you know, if you got that medication that, you know, you took a couple of them after your surgery and they're just sitting there, you know, I really encourage you to get out this weekend and drop them off at one of the drop-off sites. Again, you can find the site. It says find the site on the app, and you can type in your zip code. Also, year-round, there are multiple locations, whether it be pharmacies or police stations or a variety of locations where there are safe disposable boxes where you can drop off these medications without the event happening. You can just go drop it off anytime. It's really important to do that because when we keep that medication out there, it can potentially fall into someone's hands and get into the street, and we don't want that to happen. Some additional resources that is on the second page of that document that has the QR code. It's from the federal government, SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and the Behavioral Health Treatment Services Locator. And this is just information where you can find treatment and recovery resources. And with that, I'm going to ask this question. What is one thing you have learned? Who can answer this question? Go ahead.
It can still be, like they can still overdose after giving Narcan. It'll last longer than 90 minutes.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. What she said that, what she learned was that the Narcan lasts 30 to 90 minutes, and so potentially if someone doesn't go to the hospital, they could go back into a second opioid overdose because the Narcan can wear off before the opioids were out of their system. Anybody else want to share something that they learned? I hope you learned a lot. I hope it was good information. I hope you enjoyed it. Are there any questions? Yes, ma'am.
What's the cost of it?
It's kind of expensive. To be honest, I've heard it range from, like, if you were just pay out of pocket, $74 to like $125 for a box of these 2 nasal sprays. So it's pretty costly, the nasal spray. The injectable Narcan, which we have some harm reduction coalitions here in Arkansas. There's a couple I know in Northwest Arkansas. There's one in Central Arkansas that distribute this harm reduction equipment for free. They would typically give out the injectable naloxone because it's much cheaper and easier to obtain. I know there's a lot of great work being done to make this an over-the-counter medication, which will be a great step in the right direction. The next barrier, though, will be cost, because if it's over-the-counter but it costs you $75, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard. So we need to make this as easily accessible for any and everybody to have it, to know how to use it, and to access it if needed. Hopefully you never have to use it. Hopefully that never is the case. But if you are in that position, you could potentially save someone's life. And Patrice Atkins is a good friend of mine and is the community liaison at CJI, the Criminal Justice Institute. You can always reach out to her if you have questions or comments about the information that you received today about CJI. And I'll share my contact with information with you later on. Is there another question?
So we get this kit and we have this Narcan. If for some reason it expires, do we contact your organization to get a different one, or are we able to like take it to a pharmacy and this is where I got it?
I mean, you can go to a pharmacy because of that standing order, whether you're going because something's expired, or just going to get some new because you've already used it, or you can reach out to CJI. If you report through this mechanism of reporting, there's an option, I believe, where it'll give you the option, do you need more? I don't know about the case as far as if it's expired. Like this one right here says March 2025, so it's a couple, yeah, and I believe personally that it's longer than that. It's just, you know, it's part of the deal, but technically there is an expiration date on it, but that's a good question. Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Kyle, do you think that people might use this drug as a crutch or as a, like, oh, well, I'm not going to be careful because I know somebody's got a Narcan I can use? Or do they even think that way at all? I'm just wondering.
I guess to be clear, the question is, could this potentially be used as a crutch? And I'm going to paraphrase what you're saying, but because this is a common question, could this be a form of enabling people to continue using drugs or continue using opioids? And I'll just be direct and frank about that answer is, I don't know, and I don't necessarily care because people are dying, and I just don't want them to die. And so recovery is possible. You'll hear that in my story. But dead people can't find recovery. Dead people can't get their kids back. Dead people can't go back to school and pursue their dreams, you know, prior to them getting caught in this cycle. And so whether it is or is not, to me, it's not my responsibility, the way I look at it, to determine their motivations there. But if I have it or they have it, I certainly want them to be able to be alive and be able to use it. But that's a common question, so thank you for asking.
That person wouldn't be able to, really.
No, if you're unconscious and overdose, no, I mean.
But if you know you're going down that, you know, I don't know anything about it, but if they know that they've overdosed or think they've overdosed.
Yeah, they could potentially, most likely. That's probably not going to happen because, again, just like the communities get more familiar with Narcan, people that are recovered, people that are using drugs, all are familiar with Narcan too and know exactly what it's going to do to you. And so when you're using something for one effect, you're typically not going to put something in your body to completely erase out what you did. But did you have a question?
You mentioned being able to just get it from the pharmacist. Is it something that there is also a prescription written for someone who maybe the doctor knows they're at risk for overdosing?
Yes, thank you for asking that, Jessica. There's another law in place in the state. So if you are prescribed a particular type of opioid or for a particular length of time, that the physician is required to co-prescribe Narcan or naloxone alongside with it. So they have that in place as well to encourage physicians to write this prescription as well. So great question. Thank you.
I have a question. I know, like you were saying, if you do like the chest drugs, are you supposed to do that before you administer the Narcan or after?
That's really throughout the process of just trying to get them to respond to you. I mean,
what kind of response would you look for though to see like if it actually worked?
Well, so you're going to administer the Narcan no matter what, but your whole purpose in that is keeping the person alert and awake and not from going back and falling back asleep or going back into an overdose. And so your response will be like their eyes to open. You'll hear that breathing, that raspy breathing. That video we skipped over, the police officer, when he does it, the person's got that real deep raspy breathing. And so you're just looking for any type of verbal or physical response just to keep the person alert. So that's really, you know, these steps, other than 911, all can be like used throughout the process at any time, you know, just as needed.
So like after you get like that initial response is when you would turn them to their side and then...
Yes, because that's when you give them the dose, that's when you're going to want to put them in the rescue position if they respond. You know, if they don't respond, and you have to give them more doses, you want to keep them on their back to give them medication to make sure, you know, because that's the best way that it's going to go up their nostril.
That first paper you sent me, it had the instructions on how, I do have that, and I can email it to you or get copies of it to you that you sent me. It has all the where it shows how to use it and how to turn in that first one.
Yeah, and also inside this kit, the QR code on the back, the Narcan app, all of those places have the instructions spelled out. It's pretty, it's a pretty simple process as far as administering it when it comes to the nasal spray. But you can find that information in a lot of locations. So, but thank you for saying that. Yes, ma'am.
How often do you see those prescribing from the?
That's a good question. I would be interested in seeing that data myself. I'm not sure. There are some physicians that are, more of advocates for that type of initiatives, and some that aren't. So I don't really know the answer to it, but I think we're better than we were, but we've got a lot of work to do in all these areas.
I work for a provider that prescribed it every time she prescribed a pain med. So she prescribed Narcan every single time for breakfast.
That's a great practice. I would say that's a really great way to do it, because worst case scenario, it's just a good thing to have. The way we look at defibrillators and AEDs, is the way that we need to look at this. It needs to be everywhere, and the public, and we all need to have really easy access to it. But yeah, that's a great example. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, that's the end of this presentation. I know that we are running up close to our starting time for the next. I really hate to, about this paperwork thing. It's just part of the deal. I just really need you to fill out this paperwork and be sure that you get it turned in. There'll be a sign-in sheet over here that you'll have to sign to get your kit. Beverly, let me ask you this. Do we want to do that right now?
Any of y'all staying for the next part of it? Okay, if you're not staying, go ahead and come up here and sign this, and we'll give you your kit.
Okay. But I encourage you to stay. We've got Jessica Song, the 2022 Arkansas Teacher of the Year, is here with us, and then myself are both going to be sharing some of our story and some of our passion, and we'll be starting that here in just a little while. So I appreciate your time, and I encourage you to stick around.